the Universe trilogy. The first 2 books are Across the Universe and A Million Suns, and the third one is Shades of Earth. It comes out next January, so yay. I am moderating this panel full of such a group of talented writers here, so let's give them a round of applause first. The Hocus Pocus panel is magic and monsters and sci-fi and fantasy. We're going to be exploring all of those topics and more. We're going to start off with letting each of these authors introduce themselves. So,
here we go. My name is Max Gladstone. My first novel, 3 Parts Dead, came out from Tor a week and a half ago. It's about a very exciting time for me. About a first-year associate at a necromancy firm who's running around trying to resurrect a dead god. So, a lot of fun stuff going on here. Happy to be on the panel.
Hi there, my name is Victoria Schwab, and my first book, The Near Witch, came out last summer. It's a fairy tale. And my next book, The Archive, comes out in January, and it's about a library where the dead are shelved like books. Hi everybody, my name is Andrea Cremer. I'm the author of the Nightshade series. The books are, thanks. My books are Nightshade, Wolfsbane, and Bloodrose, and then there are 2 prequels, the first of which, Rift, was just published in August, and the second, Rise, comes out in January, and then will also be followed by a book I co-authored with David Levithan called Invisibility, out in May.
Hi, I'm Richard Kadrey. I do the Sandman Slim series. The new book, Devil Said Bang, came out about a month ago, and I'm working on book 5 now.
I got it. Hi, Jacqueline Carey. I'm here supporting my very first urban fantasy, Dark Currents, published by Penguin Rock. And I'm going to put a plug in here because a lot of people didn't seem to know this the other day. We're all signing afterward, and Barnes & Noble is here at the con selling books. A lot of titles you're hearing about today.
Hi, my name is Cecil Castellucci. I write young adult novels and comic books, The Plain Janes. My newest book is called The Year of the Beasts, which is a hybrid book, prose and graphic novel. The graphic novel part is about a girl who's a Medusa. And my first science fiction novel, Tin Star, comes out next October.
Hi, my name is Jocelynn Drake. I wrote the Dark Days series, which is a vampire series. And then next week, we are officially launching the Asylum Tales series, which features a tattoo artist and a series of warlocks.
Hi, I'm Kim Harrison. Best known for the Hollows series. I have a book that just came out last week, which is why I'm here. It's called Into the Woods, which is Tales of the Hollows, and possibly some hints about what might be coming after the Hollows. But don't panic, we still have 3 more books to go.
I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So if you guys have burning questions, we will get to them at the end. And as Jacqueline said, there is going to be a signing following this panel, so you can buy all of our books, all of them, a great big old stack, and lug them around to get them all signed. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and I think we're going to start with what I call the lightning round. And the goal here is to answer the question in as short as possible. 1 word is fine. And if you can't think of anything, you can always just like shout pass, and we will try not to make too much fun of you for not thinking of anything quick enough. So our first lightning round question is, this panel is focused on magic and monsters and sci-fi and fantasy. So, if you could have any magical power, object, or monster, which would it be? Dun dun dun. Let's start at the end. It's lightning. Yes, you get it.
I would, if I could have a magic power, it would be to fly, just like Superman.
I want to be able to eat anything I want and never have to think twice.
I would like to, I'd like to fly as well, actually. I think that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to say fly.
It's hard to top fly, but hopefully it would also burn a lot of calories and incorporate both answers 1 and 2.
I'd go for telekinesis, and I would just go down the street and just flip cars all over.
I want to be an airbender. I think I want to be able to manipulate time, but only like stop it, slow down, or speed it up. Like no go backwards, because it seems like that's where everything goes wrong. It's like
Teleportation.
Yeah. I would teleport straight to the panel I want to go to in Halloween.
Yeah, skip the line. Breakfast in Paris, then skip the line. That's great.
You have a much broader sense of it.
Thank you.
Okay, so Victoria, I'm going to put you on the spotlight first. In your debut, The Near Witch, you did something that I've never really seen before. Your story is basically a fairy tale, but you invented the fairy tale. It's not a retelling of any other kind of fairy tale. Can you tell us how you came up with this idea and how you developed it after that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I wanted to write a fairy tale. I didn't want it to be a retelling. I wanted it to be an original. And I studied fairy tales and folklore in college, and I was in love with them. Something that I always noticed was that the settings, especially in the classic fairy tales, were very sparse. And that was one of the ways he kept fairy tales timeless. They were kind of vague in that respect. So I wanted to write my own fairy tale, and I wanted to write a fairy tale where the setting was absolutely vital, where it was a character in the book. Because that was something that, I mean, growing up with Grimm, I loved that, but it wasn't the case. So yeah, I wanted to I wrote a fairy tale set in the English moors, like set in a place where there are nature witches, there are elementals. So it's a place where you have witchcraft and you have power that centers around the setting, the nature element of it. So it became absolutely vital to the story.
Excellent. Okay, so this question is for everyone but Victoria. And if you want to pass, you can. But all of your books include legends and monsters and magic with roots in our world in some way. We have vampires and werewolves and Norse mythology, oh my. Can you tell me a little bit about how you put your own personal spin on each of these creatures and magic systems?
I guess I have a microphone, so I'll start. Well, I was really interested in the ways that magic can behave a lot like almost currency. Like you can use it to get basically anything that you want. You can bargain with people. You can have binding contracts that will hold each of you to an accounting in the end. And so I wanted to investigate ways that that same sense of sort of magic as a contract or magic as a process of bargaining might apply to supernatural characters. So, you know, a vampire might end up being someone who's basically mortgaged away their ability to be in daylight in exchange for speed or in exchange for extra strength. And the same's true of a lot of the magical creatures and powers and beasts and gods that show up in the book.
Well, prior to becoming a full-time novelist, I actually had a career as an academic. I have a PhD in early modern history, and I specialize in the intersection of religion, violence, and gender, which meant I spent a lot of time looking at witches. So for me, writing the Nightshade trilogy and then the prequels is very much about creating an alternate history of witchcraft that's grounded in the reality, but then bringing more of the fantasy and magic that I love so much into the story itself.
For me, it's a matter of vagueness. My protagonist is a pretty chaotic character, so there are actually magical systems in the book, but you don't get to see them because the point of view character is too screwed up to actually use any of them. And actually, in the newest book that just came out, I actually discussed the magical systems very briefly, just because I got tired of people asking me, is there a magical system that these people use? So yes, there is. You get one page on it and that's it.
My contribution to the pantheon of supernatural and dark currents are ghouls, which we first encounter as these creatures that subsist on human emotion, and they're kind of gross and creepy, and they hang out with skanks and meth addicts because they thrive on the misery. But then as the book evolves, you come to find out they have a tragic backstory and call themselves the outcast. And that was sort of a fun way to, like I said, contribute something new to the pantheon.
Well, I'll talk about Year of the Beasts, and that's the comic book portion of it is about a Medusa whose parents have turned to stone, and there's a Minotaur and a mermaid and centaur. And what I was really interested in was having a very quick understanding of what these characters are, because we all know what a Medusa does. Like, if you look upon her, you'll turn to stone. But it's set in a contemporary setting, and it's also a substitution for emotions. And so, the sort of I was interested in spinning that into feelings of grief and loss and complex relationships.
When I started working on my newest series, The Asylum Tales, I decided that I wanted to work in a completely open world, which means that when you walk out the door, you can meet vampires, werewolves, ogres, trolls, satyrs, incubus. I mean, you can think of it, and they're probably going to be living down the street from you. And when I created this world, I realized, wow, humans are really freaking screwed on this. So I had to give them an edge somehow, some way to be able to compete with all these other creatures. So everyone goes to their tattoo artists, and with the right amount of money, they can put a potion in your tattoo that will give you a little bit of luck, that will help your love life, that will help you get that new job, whatever you can think of, they can probably come up with a potion for it. And it was my own different twist on the magic system.
Well, I did not actually go to school to be a writer. I have a degree in the sciences, actually. And when I sat down to write Dead Witch Walking, the first book in Hollows, I wanted to make the magic logical and believable as far as I could. If it made sense to me, I tend to remember it more. So I'll take, for example, Jinx, my pixie. He's small, and he's got flight. So I based him on somewhere between a hummingbird and a bumblebee. So he's very quick, he's very fast, he eats nectar and pollen, he has a lot of kids, and they don't live very long. So using my scientific background, I kind of took a familiar, figure and made him my own, and it's worked really well because I don't forget what he can do if I base it on logic.
Okay, lightning round again. What is the absolute scariest, most horrifying monster you can think of? Go.
Minotaur. Minotaur, because they got those nasty horns.
Anything that looks like a snake.
Anything that sucks your soul.
First thing came to mind wasn't a monster, it's the dead woman in the bathtub in The Shining.
Miss Lightfoot, my 8th grade English teacher.
I have to go with Bath Zombies from 28 Days Later. I gotta go with shadow people, or like those kinds of ghosts you can only see out of the corners of your eyes, and when you turn the lights on and off, yeah.
Code the Face Stealer from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay, so spinning off on that question, what is it that really makes the monster scary? You all had different answers for this. So what is the scariest part of the scary monster? Is it the fangs and claws, or is it something else, something more dark?
I guess I'll go, and then we can go back through. The thing that absolutely terrifies me about Ko is that he knows what's going on inside you, knows every single little weakness of your own personality, because he's assuming it, and assuming the faces of other people that he's stolen over the course of thousands and thousands of years. Imagine, like, Hannibal Lecter, give him 10,000 years of experience basically hunting down people, worming his way inside their minds, and then stealing them. And then they're stuck with physical bodies but no identities anymore. That's pretty horrifying.
For me, the scariest thing is always the unknown. Like, I think, especially in scary movies, the things you can't see are always scarier than the things you can. I remember seeing, like, Signs or something, and the aliens were way scary up until the point you, like, saw them in the TV reflection, and you're like, oh, well, now I've seen you. So, like, I mean, like, anything you can't see, like, to me, and that's, like, anything that is, I mean, like, for me, shadow people, I didn't even know they existed, like, that there was a phenomenon until a couple years ago, but, like, everyone has shadows. Like, shadows are everywhere. They're in every part of your life. So the idea that, like, one of them could be animate, like, could come to life, or it's the possibilities that scare me. And mine's just super visceral and kind of literally, I just don't want to be eaten. And zombies, both fast and slow, they seem to always start with your guts, you know? And like that, I feel like that's always how it starts, so it's not a good eating. You're not just dead and then food. It's just very slow and ucky and horrible, and projectile vomit happens. And so it's really, for me, it's about the gross out factor rather than the fear.
Not being eaten is a good goal in life.
For me, it always comes down to like real monsters and real horror, the complete, overwhelming loss of control. I mean, it's the difference between horror and terror to me. Terror is momentary. It's the thing jumping out of the shadow and scaring you. But real horror, easy example is George Romero's zombies versus modern zombies that run. Modern zombies that run, to me, are terror. It's a momentary thing where you run and you escape those zombies. But the Romero zombies are slow and relentless. They're like the sea. You will never escape. And that, to me, is real horror. I'll take it back. Come on up.
I think with the dead woman in the bathtub scenario, again, it's that fear of the worst thing possible happening. What if I pull back this bath curtain is the worst possible thing? Finding a dead body. Even worse, a decomposing dead body. And then it takes those stakes and amps it up further. Even worst possible, she sits up with her fishy, clammy hands and starts to throttle you. So it's taking the, ordinary and just amplifying it.
I think for me, like soul-sucking, like anything that would like take out your essence, it's about identity, like you were saying, but also I think it's like about zombies too, because zombies, they take away your sort of individuality, and I think that like, we all have our own particular consciousness that we like, and we would like to continue having it, so I just don't want to lose that, yeah.
Gosh, scary for me. It's the villain that comes with the angelic face, the ones that come up to you and you automatically trust, like, oh, that one's okay. And they get in your head and they start taking you apart until you doubt everything. Your sense of self, your sense of what is right and wrong. It's real or fake. Yeah, it's where you will look at the sky and say, yeah, that really is green up there, because they told you to. And that, to me, that's scary.
Okay, I'm going to change my answer on the fly. Now, actually, the thing that scares me the most is being led down a false path, that you think you know where you're going, and then the rug is pulled out from under you, and actually there's nothing there to catch you. And it's not more of a physical fear, it's a mental fear. It's what's going on upstairs. Did that really happen? Am I hallucinating? Am I going nuts? Is the world around me real? Or am I creating all of this because I'm trying to come up with an understanding for what's really happening, and I can't handle it? So that's really what my fear is. It has nothing to do with minotaurs.
So basically,
maybe it does, yes, the crazy labyrinth. Yeah. There it is.
That's right. So we don't want to be eaten or tricked or destroyed by anything, especially in 8th grade. Yeah. Okay. We're all clear. I'm going to focus next on Jacqueline. Let's talk about setting in sci-fi and fantasy for a moment. Jacqueline, your first books, the Cashel books, the setting was practically a character in its own self. It was a fully realized world with a very unique landscape. Can you tell us about how you shifted to the Midwestern resort town of Pencowit? Am I saying that right?
Of Cowit, yeah.
Cowit. In your latest book, Dark Currents.
Well, I actually live in a Midwestern resort town. It's one of those places that you don't think exists outside TV shows, like a Twin Peaks or a Stars Hollow kind of thing. And I always planned on writing something set there because it's such a vivid place. And I thought, it's going to be something really mature and sophisticated, maybe exposing the seamy underbelly of the charming town, maybe a northern Gothic. Why should the South have all the Gothic? And then I was also thinking about urban fantasy, just because it seemed like a really fun genre. And what could generate, what would cause magic to exist in a place? And I kind of seized on this idea of an underworld, the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. I thought, well, that would make sense to me. And then I thought, wait a minute, we have a buried town, which is true. Old lumber town. They removed all the white pines and the sand dunes swallowed the town. Once I had that idea, I'm like, perfect setting for an underworld. Let's relocate Hel, Norse goddess of the dead, to Little Niflheim beneath the dunes. And I was kind of off and running from there. And the setting, again, very much a part of a third character, as it were.
Excellent. I'm going to change this question for everyone. Can you tell us a little bit about how you tied magical to the mundane in your setting, and you really made your setting to be an integral part of your books? We can stare off at each other.
In Year of the Beast, it's a real world. I do have a witch that is substitutes for someone else, and I think I'm going to talk about Tin Star, which is my science fiction novel, because that's in a space station, and so you want to tie the realness of like how we would function in outer space. You know about that, and also have aliens that are alien and yet familiar. And so I think that you have to like sort of almost humanize everything so that we can all relate to it.
Gosh, I grounded my magic in tattoos. I went to a rock concert, Rock on the Range up in Columbus, Ohio, a couple years ago. And I was looking around and I thought, not only did you have to have a ticket to get in, but apparently you needed a tattoo as well. And it's like, I'm gonna reach out to the biggest audience in the world, because it seems like so many people have tattoos now, or they know somebody who has a tattoo. So it's an easy, relatable source, and it's like, well, let's shove some magic in there and see what happens.
Oh. You can pass if you want to.
Okay, and the question was, how do we ground our magic?
Yeah, and bring in the setting.
Okay, in the Hollows, in my urban fantasy, the magic is out. It's not hidden, it's in your face, it's on the street. Most of the supernaturals live across the river in Kentucky rather than in Cincinnati, but if you're one of the upper echelon, you can probably live in Cincinnati and get away with it. I am not drawing on real life here at all. Jocelyn's from Cincinnati. So just having a real city and being able to draw on the layout of the city and the real things that are there really does help ground the magic quite a bit. I write from a first-person point of view, which is very intimate. That also really helps to draw and ground the reader in reality. So that's pretty much how I do it.
Anyone else?
It's LA.
Yeah, I also use real settings, but I think, as Victoria pointed out, there are so many places in our world that are very, very magical, like the moors. And for me, the elemental magic is very important in the Nightshade series. So there are 4 sites that 2 factors of which are fighting over: the earth, air, fire, and water. And so, you know, earth is in the Rocky Mountains, fire is in an active volcano in the Pacific Rim, air is up in the Alps, and water's in a cenote in the Yucatan of Mexico. So it really, I feel like it can be very easy to take places that you just assume are normal, but actually are very, very powerful in terms of a magical sense.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it a little bit in regards to like the Near Witch obviously being set in a village in the middle of an expanse of nature, and in that case, the setting is a character. But the thing that, like, something that super excites me is this idea that magic exists and maybe we're just not looking hard enough, or we're like not seeing the world right. And so for the archive, which is the one about the Library of the Dead that comes out soon, like I wanted to layer the world. So essentially, like, the magical world exists in the same world as everything else, and you can't see it. Like, it's right there, it's right in front of you all the time. You just don't have the key to get through that particular door. And my main character does, so thankfully, as the reader, you get to go through with her. But like, yeah, that book, it's set in, I generally like to like confine my characters, because the entire book is set inside this old hotel called the Coronado, and that's your human world. And then you have the archive, which is this vast library of the dead, and it's about those 2 worlds and the scene between the 2. But the mundane world is just that. It's so mundane because it's not mundane for my main character, but if you're not my main character and you don't have the keys to get through that particular door, you're gonna walk right past it. You're never gonna see the way in.
So when I started writing 3 Parts Dead, I wanted to explore a magical and sort of surreal aspect of stuff that we think of every day as pretty mundane and sort of quotidian, right? I started writing it back in 2008. I had come home from teaching abroad and was looking for work about the time that the economy tripped and stumbled into a meat grinder, and there was, you know, bits of economy on everybody's jackets that they had to brush off. And I thought to myself, wow, here's this invisible world that's composed of immortal, immaterial entities that is falling apart. It's cracking and shards of it are getting everywhere. And yet you couldn't point to physical damage. You couldn't point to, like, you know, this building on Wall Street fell down or something. It was a spiritual crisis on some level, a crisis of faith, a crisis of trust. And so I thought, gosh, well, you know, this is basically, we have pagan gods, sort of. I mean, kind of weird to think about them that way, and they're dying. And so why not explore what that society looks like? Why not lean into this invisible aspect of the world that we live in and that we operate in every day when we you know, walk up to pay for a cup of coffee and don't think about until it starts coming down on top of our heads.
Okay. So this is possibly the toughest question of the whole panel, and it's a lightning round, so get ready. Okay, what is the absolute best, your most favorite fantasy or sci-fi book? Go.
Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny.
Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Marion Zimmer Bradley's The Mists of Avalon.
The Haunting of Shirley Jackson.
It's a little out there for fantasy, but Watership Down. Richard Kadrey.
My favorite book when I was growing up was Logan's Run, so I say that one. Crap.
Hobbit.
Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury.
More fuzzy moments. Okay, Andrea, I'm going to focus on you. I have the advantage of knowing Andrea outside of this, so I have the inside information on this. And I know that you have an unusual philosophy with your take on werewolves. You basically explain them using string theory. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, I did. Okay, so I had the way I come up with characters, the books, is that they're inspired by characters, and so when I started writing the Nightshade series, all I knew at the beginning was that it was a story that there was a girl who also happened to be a wolf, and that she was in trouble. And that was a big problem for me because I don't like traditional werewolf mythology, mostly because I thought it would be just a huge pain to have to deal with a character who every time turned into a wolf lost her clothes. And I don't mind naked stuff at all, that's cool, but not in the context of, oh, I just fought a huge battle and, oh, where are my pants? And the other thing was, you know, in like most traditional werewolf films, like The Howling or American Werewolf in London, there's that pivotal scene where they're starting to change for the first time, and the, you know, really naive character is usually a woman, is standing in the corner watching, and all of a sudden the man's going, and you know, and it takes 10 minutes, and their ribs are cracking, and I am screaming at the television at this point, going, just hit them or run away. You know, it's like this is not a threatening creature at all. That metamorphosis absolutely infantilizes the werewolf. And so for me, it's like, I knew that my wolves were warriors, so they could not take 10 minutes to be ready to get in the game. That was ridiculous. So I had to figure out, well, how can they instantly become wolves and not lose their clothes? And so I was like, I like string theory because it posits that there are, you know, lots and lots of dimensions out there that are parallel to us. And so I thought, well, what if my werewolves have basically a dimension that's pretty much like a closet? It's almost like the room of opportunity in the Harry Potter series, right? Yeah. So they are always fully human and fully wolf, but just occupy whichever form is in the current dimension and can just switch back and forth at will. And then they don't lose their clothes, they don't lose their possessions, and they can instantly be a fighter without having to be all gross and yuck. So there you go.
Not a fan person. Okay, so everyone else, what are some unusual sources of inspiration or influence that most people would realize? I definitely would not have assumed string theory, which I only know about from watching The Big Bang Theory. So do you all have any kind of unusual backgrounds or influences and inspirations?
Hollywood movies, every single one of them. That's all I'm saying.
I read a lot of odd sort of forensic material. I have an original, something like 40-year-old copy of the Warren Commission report, and I have old medical texts, things like that. It's sort of the opposite of the fantasy world, but it kind of, because of that, I think it kind of makes you think about the everyday in a very different way.
Both of my parents are scientists. My dad's a neurobiologist and my mom's a molecular engineer, genetic engineer. And so I'm really interested in science. So in a lot of my short genre fiction, all the science in it is correct. And so I get a lot of inspiration from Scientific American.
Wow. I went to a tattoo parlor. I was on my second tattoo, and the guys working there knew I wrote vampire novels, and I was getting close to the end of the series, and they go, you know what? You need to write about a tattoo artist and just like throw some magic in there, but you know, make him really cool, but like Fabio and all. And I snickered and laughed, and like a month later, I was sending in a proposal to my editor. He is not Fabio, though.
I think it's, for me, just a constant state of being observant. But that said, you're always trying to look for things that will deliberately feed it. Right now, it's a back stack of National Geographic magazines that my father's given me. It can be museums. Most fun research thing for Dark Currents was riding the dune schooner rides. Awesome.
I'd say like less in research and more just inspiration is for me. I'm like, Doctor Who is one of those things that like, in true like time travel fashion, like always seems to impact me out of order. Like I don't realize that I like something, like I wrote the archive before seeing the library episode. Yeah. And but like, and it impacts me out of order, but like I just find like just the notion, I always joke that show's bigger on the inside. And like the show, the fact about it that like, regardless of how cheesy it can sometimes like be, it's got such an emotional core no matter what's happening, no matter how like funny the episodes are or how light, there's just always this intense emotional core to it. And like I find that to be like Doctor Who inspiring on the bad days, inspiring on the good days. Like it's the show I go to when I need to like recharge creative batteries, and then little tiny pieces of it, like a crack in the wall. There's a crack in the wall in the archive, and like little like tiny moments. There's a guy that wears red chucks and looks slightly like David Tennant too, you know, that's cool. I can put that in. But he's I can picture David Tennant in my head when I'm writing him. But it's just like the things, like I think there's research, and then there's also things that just inspire you from like a storyteller's perspective.
Kind of like your work with the forensic files, I find myself really enjoying academic writing, which is sort of weird because back when I was in school, I would go to sleep reading a lot of this stuff. But one of the dangers of working in fantasy and science fiction and sort of making things up a lot is that you can end up not examining the ideas that are coming out of your head and going onto the paper, so you can end up kind of creating stories that feature biases that maybe you didn't realize you have, or adopt aspects of the culture that you didn't realize were actually becoming central to the way you put together your magic system, or the way that you portrayed like a particular character. And so reading academic work in sociology and theology, I mean, that's kind of where my background comes in, a lot of German existentialist theology from the 30s and stuff. So, you know, Rudolf Bultmann, yes. So reading all of those things gives me new perspectives on my own ideas, and then allows me to think, oh gosh, why don't I try thinking about this whole thing differently? Why don't I approach this question from a totally different angle? And it's cool to stand outside yourself that way, or at least I think it is.
What about you, Beth? Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to, Beth is the author.
Oh, unusual inspirations? Well, I guess probably the biggest influence on my science fiction novel that takes place in space is Agatha Christie, which doesn't quite match up, but the mousetrap is everyone's trapped in an inn, and so on my ship, everyone's trapped on a spaceship, and then lots of murders and people blowing up, and yeah.
I wanted to add one thing. The Quay brothers, the animators, Americans who live in England, if you know what I'm talking about, There's an exhibit over at the MoMA right now, and you should go see it. I saw it this morning because I couldn't get into my hotel. And if you know their films, The Street of Crocodiles, some of the other stuff, it's amazing. And even if you don't know their films, even if you're not a writer, the dioramas, the sets they build for these amazing movies is really inspiring, the depth of the work. So go check it out at the MoMA.
Okay, so another lightning round. What is a type of magic or maybe a monster that you have not yet written about but you really would like to? Purple.
A minotaur.
They got sharp pointy horns. No, I really don't know. I create the monsters when I need them, so until I need them, I don't even think about them.
With this new series, I've thrown everybody in. There are too many. Oh wait, I had to take a pixie out. I haven't got to write about pixies yet.
I already said it, werewolf.
I guess I would say I've written very indirectly, but never directly, about angels. So,
Kind of with, I don't care unless I need them for a story, so.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really difficult question. But I really, really want to write a murder mystery / horror, but I don't know.
You can put it in space and everyone can blow up.
I could put it in space.
It would be awesome. As long as there's explosions.
So yeah, so there's a big figuring out again, like which sort of supernatural creature would best fit the bill for that, and I won't happen until I start writing, so we'll figure that out.
For the longest time for me, it was superheroes. Like, I desperately wanted to write a superhero book, but now I have a superhero book coming out next year. So I finally sat down and just did that, because I was like, hey, this is like, why not? So listen, do it. But so now I want to write demons. I've never gotten to write demons, and I just feel like there's so much potential there. People embracing their roles as demons and those who might be embracing it a little less so.
I haven't done anything with divination yet, and it seems like you could get people in so much trouble. So, maybe that.
Awesome, okay. Well, a common idea is that the best science fiction and fantasy holds up a mirror to our own real world. I know that we have tattoos going on strongly, and I know, Richard, your latest book has politics in it as well, to a certain extent. I mean, as he's on his rise to power. So can we talk about how the science fiction and fantasy tales in your worlds reflect our current world in some deeper way? Like, how are you holding up a mirror to society, if you are?
Oh, I've already talked about that a little bit, so maybe I'll just go quick and pass it on to other people. I think that one of the real powers that we have writing in science fiction and fantasy and all the sort of genres of romance, like pushing the boundaries, is that we get to confront the world in a way that sometimes it's very difficult to confront. You can be escapist if you want. There's no shame in that. There's no harm in that either. But you can hold up aspects of our reality that we live in every day that are sometimes really difficult to get at, fictionally speaking. If you wanted to write the sort of real-world story of this problem, then you would have to go, 300 years back in time and work exhaustively forward, and you'd end up with a book that's as long as Infinite Jest, and it would be as difficult to convince people to crack open. So we get a wonderful opportunity to highlight aspects of the world and engage with them.
Yeah, I mean, The Near Witch, my first book is, it's a fairy tale, obviously. It's set in the middle of the moors, kind of probably about 200 years ago. But at its core, it is a story about inclusion and exclusion. Like, I grew up in a small town, like in the South, and that notion of insider-outsider culture in small towns, and the way that if you are not part of that community, if something goes wrong, like, you are #1 suspect instantly. Like, there's a level of distrust and suspicion towards outsiders. And so in The Near Witch, like, a guy comes to town, like, comes to the village, no strangers have ever come to the village, and the next day the children all begin to disappear one by one by one. And the immediate assumption, obviously, is that the stranger did this, that he's doing this, and it's the way that that suspicion grows very quickly and very dangerously in a small, protective, fear-filled town. So, I mean, it's definitely a reflection of that. You could have taken magic out, and it could have been a small town anywhere. Well, I think on one level, my books all deal with alternate histories, and I think anytime that you
kind of tweak the narrative of history that we know. It makes you look at what has been recorded and think about how it was written and who wrote it and why they wrote it, and really take into consideration what's true and false in terms of historical narratives. But my biggest thing is I'm a huge advocate of GLBT advocacy and equal rights. So really taking into account double standards and power struggles about gender and sexuality is always at the forefront of my novels. So, and that will always be the case.
My bit of the real world is that my tattoo book, Butcher Bird, that came out a few years ago, and the Sam & Slim series were both inspired by George Bush's presidency. Because I didn't know who all these fundamentalists were who basically taken over the country, so I started reading all this religious history. And if you read that stuff, you start reading the heretical stuff, and then it leads you to the devil, inevitably. You know, trying to dismantle those stories and those theories and the whole mythos that kind of underpins the Western world. That's kind of where the whole thing came from, and you know, then I put in trunks and guns, and that helped.
I described the protagonist of Dark Currents, Daisy Johansen, as a reluctant hellspawn. Essentially, she is the offspring of teenage mom who didn't realize there are places in the world you really shouldn't use a Ouija board because you don't know what you'll summon, and Belphegor, minor demon and occasional incubus. But Daisy's mother raised her to value, you know, human morality and compassion with this belief that love has a redemptive quality, even for a half-breed hellspawn. And that idea, the redemptive quality of love, is a reflection of my own beliefs and a theme that's run through other works that I've done. And I'm still doing it.
A lot of my contemporary young adult novels have a really big political element to them where, you know, the characters are going to protests for the first time, they're becoming aware of politics. And I think that one of the things about young adult fiction, but also science fiction and fantasy, is that oftentimes the stories are about people who are becoming aware of a larger world. And I think that that's sort of reflected in every science fiction and fantasy book, and I think that that is what I attempt to do in my books.
The one reoccurring theme that's run through Angels Inc. and then also through the second book that's coming out, Dead Man's Deal, is responsibility and stepping up against the world when the odds are greatly against you. When my main character starts, Gage, he's in hiding and his main focus is just to stay under the radar and survive. But as Angels Inc. progresses and then largely into Dead Man's Deal, it's about finally stepping up and helping your friends when they're in a really bad spot, even if you really didn't get them into that spot in the first place. And it's learning that survival is not what this is all about. It's about you need to step forward, make a stand when things are not how they really should be.
You know, I'm really glad this is a large panel, because it gives me a long time to think. I've got a couple things that touch on reality. I have two groups of people who have been trying to kill each other for over 5,000 years, and both of them have just about succeeded at this point. And throughout the series, it kind of ebbs and flows, but the last book, it comes to a head, and they're actually finding ways to forgive each other and move on so that they can all survive. So that's one. The second thing is genetics and modifying things. I have a tomato that has been genetically modified that pretty much starts a plague that kills off, you know, a quarter of the human population. So, you know, there's a slight little knock on the door. Hey, people, watch out what you're doing to your food supply.
And beware of tomatoes.
Yes, beware of tomatoes. The end is coming.
I was just thinking Attack of the Killer Minutes. Okay.
It's in your BLT.
Okay, so lightning round. Characters die. It just happens. But what I want to know is, do you weep for their fates, or do you laugh maniacally as they writhe in pain?
Can I start with that one? Yes and no. I have some characters that I gleefully try to kill and they survive. I have other ones that I gleefully try to kill and they get their comeuppance. I have other characters that I weep for when they pass and it hurts and I can't read those pages. And then I have others that I know they have to go and they go, and then I duck and cover when all my readers get nasty after we're doing it.
I haven't killed off too many people in the new series yet, but give me time. But I did, unfortunately, have a really high body count in Dark Days, and particularly in book 5, and I cried. Oh my God. I cried so hard, and my editor came back and said, you need to do something darker.
I cry. I don't like to laugh at horrible, horrible deaths that I inflict on my characters.
I'm a terrible person. I laugh so much when I kill, and I slaughter so many people.
I cried more often than not, but there's also the author voice in the back of your head as you're like, oh, this is good.
I've killed off one major character in the series so far, and that was actually a lot of fun. Another one's going to die in the book that I'm writing now, and that one's a little harder.
Now, I'm with Jacqueline, where it says, you know, I cry a lot when I'm writing different characters and also torment and death, but, you know, there is that sense of it doesn't feel gratuitous, it feels necessary, and then there comes in the writerly kind of pride that's there as well. Like, I can deal with stuff, even though I have gone through 3 boxes of Kleenex.
Yeah, I think I look forward to it up until the scene I actually have to write it, but like if I know that like a character doesn't die for like a book or 2 more books, like every time I write a scene with that character, I'm like, your time's coming. Like, I got you. But like, so I enjoy writing them more for it, but then when I actually get to that moment, I don't chicken out, but like I putz around and I take too much time, and then yeah, I cry a lot then, but like I don't cry up until I actually have to write it. Up until then, I'm just like, yes.
I mean, death is big and cold and lasting and final, and when I'm dealing with individual characters, there's a wonderful sort of feeling when the time finally comes. If you've laid the groundwork for it appropriately, there's this feeling of everything kind of falling into place and the death happens right. The hardest one for me is actually when there's some gigantic cataclysm that happens and a lot of people need to die off screen, because it feels like I'm basically trivializing. You know, you have 1,000 people who show up as a statistic, and that's sort of feels like a horrifying thing to do to a universe or to folks. And they just become background people.
As someone who has just done that in her 3rd book, I was terrible and I just laughed the whole time. Okay.
You know, you gotta laugh or else you start to cry, you know?
No, it's so much fun. I'm sorry. I can't help it. The best death scene I have ever written, I just wrote for my 3rd book, and after I finished, I had to call my husband. I'm like, look at this, it's awesome! Okay, so now that I appear completely insane, we have about 10 more minutes left. And we would love to take some questions from the audience. I still have a book full, but are there questions from the audience? Yes. Okay, so the question was, what's the difference between sci-fi and fantasy to us?
Well, for me, science fiction ends up often on the side of explicable and having a robust system in place, and fantasy can sometimes be a little bit looser with the systems. It's almost an approach of the character. You get worlds that are have really well built and like defined magic systems, which are basically science fiction. It's just science fiction with a science that nobody actually practices. And you have worlds where the rules are a little bit less clear and the characters are not quite as comfortable navigating. And that's sort of a fantastic setting.
Anybody else want to touch on that?
What he said.
Yeah, seriously.
Hey, another question from the audience? Yes.
Especially if you can, I know you assign like a different aura color for all of your different magic users, and anybody else who maybe assigns an element or whatever to their characters. Is there a specific reason for it? Is it having your personality aside from the demons?
So the question question is there any method to our madness when we assign elements or colors or certain characteristics to characters?
Well, when I started working with auras, I did spend about 5 minutes online looking at the aura sites, and seriously, it was only about 5 minutes until I figured out there's no science behind this. Just pick what you want, make it what you want, and so that's what I did. I try to go along with what most people would think of as gold being a cheerful, noble color, and brown being sort of a, you know, an earthy thing, and try to match it up to the personality to give you a hint of what might be inside that person that isn't evident on the pages, but I just make it all up.
Anyone else? Another question? Yes.
My question is for Max, but I guess Wesley can answer it too. As a guy who writes about gods, how do you define what a god is personally?
Oh, we have two going at the same time. Let me get yours first, and then you're next. Okay. Could you say it again? You. Okay, so the question is, do we prefer fantasy or science fiction, or both? We can do it as a lightning round, just real quick.
I like fantasy. I think I like that kind of necessary gap between, I kind of like the whimsy of it. I feel like if I had to choose, I would go with fantasy because that was my bread and butter growing up, but I feel like you're asking me to choose between, you know, chocolate cake and creme brulee, and I don't want to give up either.
I read in any genre. If something's really well written, doesn't matter to me. No preferences.
I like both because I think they're sort of like playing in different playgrounds. So both reading and writing, I like to play in both of those arenas.
I have to say I'm very similar. It's a good story. I don't care what genre, just give me a really good story.
I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy side by side, and I write urban fantasy, which is sort of, you know, you take what you like out of both genres and meld it together. But if I had to choose science fiction or fantasy, it would be fantasy.
Peanut butter and chocolate for me. Excellent independently, even better together. Some of my favorite books are things like Creatures of Light and Darkness and Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, that sort of are walking the same line, or Dan Simmons' Hyperion book, Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, which also seem to be almost mystical but are set in a science fictional universe.
Okay, in the back, could you say it again?
The question is for the whole panel, directly initially at Max. This is a person who writes about gods. How do you personally define what a god is?
Okay, so if you were writing about gods, how do we define what the god is?
What is a god? That's an excellent question.
Theology.
Yeah, I know. Here we go. See how useful this thing is. Well, there are a couple ways to think about it, right? There's this sort of there's like Augustinian sort of omniscient, omnipresent, omni-whatever. And that's like fine, but leaning into that depiction too much is forgetting the fact that every god that we think about that like has existed throughout human history has existed in relationship with a particular society and in relationship with a particular set of rituals and traditions and beliefs about them. So it's not just a bunch of, you know, omnis floating around out there in the universe. The question is how the god relates to the sort of human community, and that's very much how I'm approaching them in my book anyway, that you have gods who become sort of representations of human potential in the way that the community sees itself and reacts to itself.
Whereas I have a very different system. I mean, I deal with a library of the dead. It is kind of an afterlife mythos and a god mythos, and like so mine's a little bit more bureaucratic, I guess. Like it's a job and it's a system, and you see people in the hierarchy, but there's always somebody higher that you haven't met yet. So it's kind of that infinite staircase leading up that you don't get to meet all the people on the ladder, but it's very much like a job ladder. You meet the people in positions of power. I haven't written about gods yet, but I feel like I tend to think of them on like in two ways. One being tied to society. I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman's American Gods. I feel like he set up the god system brilliantly in that. And then the other is supernatural. They're just harder to kill.
Well, I'm writing stuff from the Christian mythos, so my God was sort of handed to me, and I'm just sort of trying to take the thing apart in the way that makes sense, that for the characters and for the world. I just don't, I think you can overthink this kind of thing. You know, we're handed these pantheons of gods, and the way Gaiman played with it, we remove them from context. You know, you were talking about the context of the gods, and then removing them completely from context is equally interesting. So, yeah, just break the thing.
I too mostly am working with deities derived from existing mythologies and religions, and can I just say that's a hell of a question to ask with 5 minutes left.
Okay, we have time for one very short, very quick question, and your hand was lightning fast.
When you have to put your character through like a difficult situation, mainly painful, do you like go into a dark place within yourself to put your character through that difficult time? And how do you get your character back out of it? How do you get them to recover?
So the question's about putting our characters in these dark places and recovering, and do we put ourselves in dark places in order to write that? Do I have one or two people who might want to answer that? Okay.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. Anybody who's read Kushiel's Avatar? Okay, the Darshanga sequence is one of the darkest things I've ever written. It was really difficult for me, and I did have to go to a pretty nihilistic place. And what got me through it, as well as the character through it, is the knowledge that going to that extraordinary place of darkness was what would make the brightness that follows all the brighter. And when you're dealing with something as big as the name of God, as I was in that one, you need that brightness to really blaze. But yeah, tough.
I actually had gone through something really terrible, and then wrote, was trying to figure out how to get myself out of my own darkness. And so by writing, not that it's bibliotherapy, but sometimes, you know, you sort of, it's a symbiotic relationship between sort of like your character, you're following what the character does, but also you're sort of working out your own stuff in a weird way.
Yeah, with Gage, he went to some really, really dark places in the second book. And there were times where I practically walked away from the computer crying. I felt so dirty when I got done with those scenes. I mean, you really have to dig around in your own past a little bit and shine a light on it. And when I got done with the scenes, I put away the computer for a day. And I spent time with my family and just kind of shut that part down so you can come back out. And you try to also end those scenes with a little ray of hope to remind yourself why you keep moving in the first place.
I'm so glad that we got to finish up the panel with a really ray of sunshine there. Happiness. We're going to have to wrap up now because we are plumb out of time, but I want to remind everybody that from 2:45 to 3:45 at tables 2, 3, and 4 in the autographing section, we'll all be there, and our books are available for purchase at the Barnes & Noble table, which is right there, so come buy our books, get them signed.